Amen. Simona, before you go anywhere, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but no, pick up the microphone. You're going to need the microphone. I just wanted to mention, it's been a few weeks since you've been in the house of the Lord here, and we just kind of...
Are you busting me for that?
No. I'm fine. It's them I'm concerned about, because many of them noticed as well. And can you tell them where you've been?
I was in Africa, in Tanzania.
And what were you doing in Tanzania?
I was hiking Mount Kilimanjaro.
She climbed Mount Kilimanjaro.
Yeah, it was awesome.
How big is it?
19,341 feet.
Impressive, isn't it? So see, those of you who assume the worst, she's fine. She was just out
mountain. We were just honoring the Lord on the mountain.
Okay,
on the mountaintops,
I'm sure.
Here in the valley.
I know you streamed the service from the top of the mountain.
Thanks,
I believe it. I just wanted to say, isn't that cool? Climbing a mountain. Very cool. Other cool stuff going on. Where's Anaya? Where's she at? Anaya, who is one of our singers, turned 18 today. Kayla over here is afraid. She knew it was coming. She turns 21 today. I feel like I'm youth pastoring again. This is awesome. I want to hit somebody with a pie. That was like, usually in youth group, that was the next thing you did, hit somebody with a pie. Welcome, everyone, to see the sea of red shirts. What an exciting day, huh? I was tempted to switch the message to Song of Solomon, where it says he's the chief of 10,000, but felt like a stretch, so I didn't do it. Couldn't resist talking about it, though. I just didn't do it. What else do we have? Oh, Gren's family says to tell you hello. They are getting settled there in Taiwan, and we're texting back and forth, and our kids FaceTimed the other night, I guess maybe last week, and just they're doing fantastic. Said they miss us, and asked we would continue to pray for them. So let's keep that in the forefront as well. Welcome to the third and final message of our series, Fight for Faith. You have to excuse me, I'm going to sit down through part of this. I don't know what happened to me. I had a worship injury. Like, I was fine when I got here, and my right knee just gave out. And so I just literally was injured in worship and then stood up and prayed for healing. I don't know how this works. Okay. It's not the only thing that's going on me, though. I'm entering the age where my memory starts to glitch, and I lose things that are kind of out there, and they drop off the grid. Like, I can remember things I don't need to know, but I can't remember things I need to know. I can remember the lyrics of a bridge of a song that I heard once in QT when I was getting a hot dog, but I can't remember that it's trash day on Wednesday, which it has been on Wednesday for 5 years. So because of this, like, one of my favorite apps on the iPhone is the Reminder app. Have you mastered this? And the trick is that if you tell it what location to remind you things at, it will do that as well. So all day as I'm going through my day and I think of these random things, hey, remind me when I get home, da-da-da-da-da. And so the worst part, though, is at the end of the day when you pull into your driveway and you think your day is done, the Reminder app goes, you've got like 8 things to do because all day you've told it reminder. Sometimes, how many of you need reminders for stuff? There's just too many things floating around out there, and you need reminders. Reminders are an important thing because they bring what is out there that we're aware of. It's like we know it's trash day, kind of, but it brings it all right to the forefront. And every week in this short series, we have read a couple of verses that remind us about the nature of faith and why we need it. And we would be amiss if we didn't pop up and reread these verses again. So there's 2 of them that I want to read. I want to read these 2 out loud. First of all, Hebrews 11:1, and look at the screen. Read this with me if you would. Now, faith is the substance of the things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Stop there for a second. Faith is real. It's substance. It's when you have it, it's like concrete. You may be the only one in the room with faith, but it's real to you. The second reminder is that this very real thing of faith is not optional, and if you don't have it, it should be at the top of your list of things to prioritize, to pursue. Let's read this second reminder, okay? But without faith, it is impossible to please Him. For he who comes to God must believe that He is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. Without faith, it is impossible to please him. So the first week we talked about those who would call themselves the nuns. Those who, if you gave them a menu of a variety of faiths, they would consciously say, no thank you. Like, I don't want any of those. I am a nun. They're not choosing the Jewish faith. They're not choosing the Christian faith or the Muslim faith. They are literally rejecting the idea of faith in something else. We also talked about people who are convinced that faith matters more than what you have faith in. And they embrace the idea that to have faith in anything is enough help for them, but faith in faith is not real. Faith that changes things is faith that is put in Jesus. It is why we are told in John 3:16 that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him, like actually has faith, places their faith in him, should not perish but will have everlasting life. That's how important this topic is of faith. The believing in Jesus changes everything, but it offends so many people. The idea of faith that, well, yeah, we should have some faith in something. Everybody loves that. But the idea that it should be in a specific man, and if it's not, you're missing out, is offensive to people. Well, what does that mean for my friend who sincerely believes in Allah? What does that mean to my Mormon neighbor? Make the best bread. Like, I don't want to have this conversation with my Mormon neighbor and jack up my bread supply. What does it mean for my family member who says they're spiritual but they're not religious, and they treat their spiritual walk like a salad bar? They just sample from all kinds of different things. What does it mean for the good old boy at work who is a good dude but just doesn't get there when it comes to Jesus? Faith in a general sense of a greater power or one of the false gods of other religions, no matter how sincere, is not enough. We're not saved by sincerity. We're saved through faith in the Jesus of the Bible. And to be half committed to that idea of, oh, he was a good guy or he was a good teacher, but not put your faith in him is painfully intellectually dishonest. Once in a while, you meet people who are so sincere and lost as can be. When we were in Cincinnati, I served on the staff of the Vineyard. It's a large church there. And the senior pastor's assistant, Donna, called me. And she said, Randy, there's some people that want to meet with Dave. He's a senior pastor. They want to talk about church growth. They want to know, kind of how we've done what we've done. And Dave is tied up. He's in meetings. Can you meet with him? And I said, oh, absolutely. She goes, oh, good, they're here. I'm like, oh, they're here. She goes, yeah, they're down in the lobby if you can go down and meet with them. So I go down in the lobby and I meet these guys. And I don't want to make a lot of generalizations about people, but if you were to look at these guys, you would say this is a very fundamental conservative group. There's two of them. I've got a very liberal friend that said, a conservative is someone somewhere that is afraid that somewhere someone is having a good time. And that they kind of look like that. They look like they were in the fear that somebody somewhere was enjoying themselves. And they're very straight-laced, white shirts, black ties, black slacks, guys that were, I was going to say they were older, but now that was a while ago. They were my age. But they're the age I am now. They're older than me at the time. And we sit down and They were just so kind, but very, very conservative. If I had seen them walking down the street, I would have thought they were probably Mormon missionaries, just so you've got a visual picture of what I'm looking at here. And I asked them, tell me about your church. And they said, we're an older congregation of Swedenborgians. Now, for the 18 and the 21-year-olds, there was a time when if you didn't know stuff, you just didn't know it. Like you couldn't get your phone out and find it out, The cell phone essentially erased ending a conversation with "we'll never know" because you can figure it out. Well, there was a time when if you didn't know stuff, you didn't know it, and this was in that era of time. And so I'm thinking, Swedenborgian. I'm like running through my Rolodex in my head of what's a Swedenborgian, what? And somewhere in the recesses of my mind, I remember It's a cult. Like, Swedenborgianism bases its teachings on Emanuel Swedenborg, who in 1750 said that he had a new revelation. He was going to be a new prophet of God, and he had a new revelation about everything the Bible was about. If I ever tell you I have a new revelation about whatever the Bible is out, take me out. Like middle of the service. Don't even wait. Okay, you're empowered. But he had this idea, and people went with it, and ultimately they don't believe that Jesus died to atone for their sins. In fact, they're very puzzled about why he died at all. And here they are asking me for help to grow their group. I'm being recruited by a cult to help them be a cult recruiter. I had to find a way to tell them that our Jesus is not your Jesus. Like, I don't want your church to grow. Guys, we're not on the same team. Okay? Because what you believe about Jesus is not what the Bible says about Jesus. Were they sincere? Unbelievably sincere. Sincerity does not save you. It's got to be sincerity in Jesus. So the second week we talked about what we had faith for, what we believed that God was going to do. We examined the life of Abraham and how he held on to God's promises, and that really extended to his children and his grandchildren. The only land we talked about that Abraham ever owned was the place that he laid his bones. He never walked in the fullness of the promise that God gave him, and yet here we are walking in it because he had faith for us and for God to do what he said he was going to do. Some people have a faith walk like Abraham, where they don't see the fulfillment of it their entire lives, and their children and their grandchildren reap the benefits of it. Others have a faith walk like Saul. We talked about him starting out very humble, very tender, but by the end of his life, what is marked, and he literally says he died in part because he had been unfaithful. One of those two blessed the entire earth. The other one has been a code word for failure, bitterness, and bad leadership. Once in a while, you meet somebody who says, I just feel like Abraham. You never meet anybody who says, I really feel called to be a Saul. Like, that's not something we aspire to, largely because of how he held his heart in regards to faith. God's hand was on one of them, but one had what the other did not, which was a deep, resounding faith. So having talked about fighting for faith in Jesus and fighting for faith of what God was going to do and what he was promising us, this morning I want to close up with the idea of fighting for faith to do. Like, what is he calling us to do? What do we want our faith to accomplish, and what do we want to exercise it? How do we want to demonstrate that faith to the rest of the world? Because it takes faith to take action in the kingdom. Like, you've got to have faith in who he is, you've got to have faith in what he's promised you, but you've also got to have faith to step out and go and do. Some of you are like, I've got to stir up faith to go do. Like, where does faith come from? Where am I getting all this faith? It's 3 weeks in a row with a completely different facet that I've got to figure out how to make it work. Some mornings I wake up full of faith, and sometimes I wake up and I reach to switch the light on and I'm surprised that it works. I have no faith. That's why we pray for God to increase our faith level in our own hearts. So where does it come from? Ephesians 2:8 tells us, for by grace you have been saved through faith. And that, speaking of the faith, is not of yourselves. It is a gift of God. Okay, so faith is a gift. I guess we'll just, hang out till it drops, right? I mean, if faith is a gift, if I don't have any, it's got to come somewhere. We know it comes from him. Well, it's not entirely that simple. Paul actually speaks to this to his protege, Timothy. Can you imagine being Paul's intern? Like, how intense of an encounter that must have been, just how strongly he felt about everything. And he's writing to Timothy, and Paul, who was bold at every turn, it might have been that Timothy struggled to keep up. There might have been days where Timothy says, can we just get like 2 days off in a row? Like, can we please quit? And Paul's going and going and going. And he writes to him, and he tells him regarding faith, 2 Timothy 1:6, therefore, I remind you to stir up the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands. He received a special endowment of faith as a gift from God, and he tells him, you've got to stir it up. It comes from God, but we have some measure of effect on our own faith. Paul tells Timothy, God will do his part. Do your part. Stir it up when you feel weak. That's not a pep talk. That's discipline and training. How do we stir up our faith? It has a lot to do with building an environment in your heart where you can hear the Lord more loudly than you hear other voices. What do you put in front of your eyes? What do you allow in your ears? What do you allow to come out of your mouth? Those are the primary things that will affect the ebb and flow of you hearing from God and receiving the gift of faith. There are times He is saying, I'm trying to give you faith, and you haven't taken the earbuds off in like 6 hours. You are pumping every area where you can take in input from all over, and it is actually stopping you from receiving the faith that I'm trying to give you. If you are stewarding your faith, you would hear what He's trying to do. But you're actually taking in things that are a drag on you, and you can't hear the Lord. What we take in has a huge impact on how we feel and how we live. If you didn't hear us shouting, we had a granddaughter born on Wednesday. Super excited. I don't have a picture for you. I can describe her. Head on one end, legs, body, Baby, okay. She's adorable. Got to meet our wonderful daughter-in-law's parents for the first time. We've never met them. They're Brazilian. We meet them in the lobby of the hospital while their daughter is giving birth. And sat and talked to them for hours. Just absolutely loved them. Had a great time. But driving over to meet the baby, because the baby's being born, so we all kind of converge on the hospital. And on the way over, I've got, some of my kids, we were taking them in shifts because you don't show up at the hospital with all of us at one time. And on the way, I tell them, I said, Hadassah, that's the little girl's name, I said, I'm going to be her favorite. I just decided. But I'm also like greasing the skids. I'm going to make it easier for her to embrace me as a favorite. I says, because I'm going to give her M&Ms. And I watched my kids in the back row who really did know better, all looking at each other like, surely he's not going to give the baby M&Ms. They're, everybody knows, not good to give a baby M&Ms. You wait a few weeks. Don't do it right away when they're born. It's not good for them. They can't take that in and be healthy. Some of you, babes in Christ, are munching on M&Ms. And you're wondering why there's no strength. It's like a failure to thrive. You're not doing well. It's because what you're taking in is actually inhibiting your ability to exhibit faith and grow. And God's like, I would love to give you more faith. You haven't even stewarded what I gave you. He told Timothy, stir it up. If a body can be derailed by M&Ms, how much can your faith be derailed by what you put before yourself? Now, don't panic. It's not entirely up to you. Even stirring ourselves up in faith, it's Jesus who moves on our heart so that we have faith in Him and faith for Him to work and faith for us to do something for Him. Hebrews 12 calls Him the author and finisher of our faith. He starts it, He finishes it. Your faith story is one that He is writing, and He will continue to write all of your days. He writes good stories, He initiates them, and He matures our faith. We bring a little faith in Jesus, and He saves us. We have a little faith that He's going to move in our lives, and He gives us promises. And we bring a little faith that maybe He's called us to do something, and He helps us do those things. The question I want to ask you this morning is, what do you have faith to do? What's before you? What is He calling you to do? Too often when we talk about having faith to do something, we feel pressured to make that vision so big, so grandiose, that it seems like, it must be a God idea because it's so big. Then we never do it because it just never comes to pass. And we live in this gray area of a huge want to and very little actual do because we're waiting for this big thing to happen. I don't want to talk about huge plans and life vision, although I love those. I want to talk about things that you could leave this room and do today. Like, do you have faith for that? The same faith that he puts in you, he anticipates that you will exercise on a day-to-day basis and display through your actions. James 2:26 says, "For as the body without a spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also." If we don't pursue faith to do something, our faith is dead. Now, I realize some people get nervous when we talk this way because when they hear faith without works is dead, they assume that the next point in the message challenges them to sell everything, go to the mission field, and die a martyr on foreign soil, probably by Thursday. Let me set your soul at rest here. The challenges I want to put before you are not like that. Now let me set your soul on edge. The challenges I want to put before you are things you could actually do, but will require you to exercise a little bit of faith. When it comes to putting faith on display, there are two kinds of churches. And I've made this distinction before, but if you're relatively new here, you may have not heard this. There are some churches that are a come-and-see church. And they design everything about the church so that the neighborhood will come and see. Come and see our building, come and see our service. It's a presentation that people come and see. See the steeple, open it up, see the people, come and see. And I am not speaking to their motivations. I'm only speaking to their methods. When the church was the center of our culture, it was fairly easy to plant a come and see church because there wasn't much else to go and see. So people would come and see. But as our culture has gotten busier and we went from 3 channels to 57 channels to unlimited channels, and we have suddenly everything streaming to our phones, suddenly it's harder to get people to come and see. So what has been had to happen for people to come and see has just gotten more and more and more. Come and see our living Christmas tree. Come and see our baptism with a high dive. Come and see our award-winning worship leader. I had this funny conversation with Dutch Sheets one time about the different standards between worship leaders and pastors. And like, you write a good worship song, they'll give you an award. Can you imagine like a pastor's award ceremony? You know, sermon of the year, best cover, preaching somebody else's sermon, you know, like, but come and see, come and see. Come get a photo with our inflatable Holy Family on Easter, whatever. Come and see. Before every service is over, they're already thinking about what are we going to do in the next one so that they come and see. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. Please, I'm speaking kind of frivolously. Please, I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying that the motivation behind it is very good. And many, many, many people come and see. And many, many people come and meet Jesus. And that's good. The downside is whatever you did to get him to come and see, you got to do again. Primarily, though, Jesus told us to go and do. That in our going, in our daily life, that our faith would be walked out and people would be attracted to the kingdom, not by their coming and seeing, but by our going and doing. Now, if you haven't figured it out, although probably 5 minutes in you did, we are probably never going to be a come and see church. We might be like a come anyway church, okay? That's just not our focus. It's not how we formed. I don't know that I have a come and see leadership style in me. But we can start going and doing like today. That can happen now. So I want to challenge you in the simplest ways this morning to fight for the faith to be a go and do church. Well, where do we start? I want to look at 4 quick areas that Jesus told us to go and do. These are things that you could start to do today. First one is one that most of us already wrestle with at some level. Like we've got at least 1 foot in this, hopefully 2, and that is the faith to go and sin no more, or to go and walk in demonstrative freedom. So that if someone were to see you and they knew you before, the question would be, what happened to you? Because you're walking differently. The story, of course, in the Bible is the woman who's caught in adultery. Now, it's interesting. Throughout history, people just don't commit adultery alone. They just don't. But we don't know what happened to the man. The woman gets caught, and they gather around ready to stone her, and Jesus exhibits great grace towards her. He actually gets down on the ground near her. And he tells them, if you're without sin, go ahead, cast the first stone. Of course, nobody's ready to do that. And in John 8, verse 10, he starts, when Jesus raised himself up, or when he stood up and he looked around, he saw there was no one but the woman. He said to her, woman, where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you? She said, no one, Lord. And Jesus said to her, neither do I condemn you. You're forgiven. But then he gives her instructions. Go and sin no more. He talked about the importance of walking away from the besetting sin that she had in her life. And she was faced with a decision here now. I have been forgiven. Can I walk this out? Can I actually do what he's told me to do and go and walk free from this sin? I'm not talking about the random sin that we fall into once in a while where we're at the grocery store and we snip at the lady and later we are convicted of that, or we do something. I'm talking about besetting sin, lifestyle habits that cripple people. He said, that's got to stop and you've got to walk free from that. That's what a go and do church does. Do you have the faith to walk in a way differently than you did when you came to Jesus? This is what it looks like. This is like the after effects of going and sinning no more. The very next verse says, Jesus again spoke to them. He's speaking to them in light of this woman. I am the light of the world. Who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. If she goes and sins no more, she becomes a beacon of light for other people. There is nothing that draws people away from their own sin and towards the light of the world than seeing somebody else who got free of the thing that they're entangled with. It gives them hope. When you find faith for freedom for your own sin, you don't just change your own destiny, you change the destiny of everyone you come in contact with. I spoke this week with somebody who is about 60 days into a journey of sobriety. They've struggled with alcohol for years, made a decision. They're 60 days into a journey of sobriety, and they were so excited because this week a friend was going with them to an AA meeting who wanted the same thing. That friend is never going to go to an AA meeting with me because it's not been my struggle. But they saw their friend walking in freedom, even 60 days into the journey, and said, you're so different, I want whatever's happening with you. When you carry freedom, you become the most appealing thing to people who are in bondage. So I want to challenge you for faith in those areas that you might be struggling to go and sin no more. That's what it means to be a go and do church, to spread across the city and say, hey, I was bound, but not anymore. To go and sin no more. Also, a faith to go and show mercy, unexpected love and favor for people who may not deserve it. That's the deal about mercy. Most of the people who need mercy are in such a bind, they don't really deserve it. It's the reason it's called mercy. You've got to give it to them. There's an instance that Jesus talks about where a man is laying on the side of the road where he's been beaten and robbed. And first thing you notice about the story is the people who you would anticipate to act one way act another. Like the people that you would bank on to do the right thing, don't do the right thing. Put yourself in the place of this man lying alongside of the road. He barely can lift his head up, but he sees somebody coming and he realizes it's a priest. And he probably thinks this is a good sign. And the priest, when he gets near him, crosses the road and walks. It's like he changes lanes in front of Target to be just a little bit further away from the panhandler. He distances himself. Then he lays there a little longer and he hears bells ringing. He thinks, ice cream truck. No, he thinks Levite. There's a Levite coming because he's got bells on his robe. He can hear him, and the bells get louder and louder and louder, and then the bells get more and more faint as he crosses the road and goes to the other side. And in Luke 10, 36 and 37, Jesus is telling this story, and he tells him about a Samaritan who comes along and has mercy on him and takes care of this man who's been beaten alongside the road. And Jesus asks the question, so which of these three do you think was a neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? And he, or the man he was talking to, said, well, the one who showed mercy on him. Jesus was grateful. He got the point. But then Jesus makes the greater point. It's not the story Jesus is telling you is not about the people he's talking about. Okay? The story is about us. And Jesus told him, go and do likewise. We have focused a lot of energy on condemning the priest and the Levite without embracing the call to go and do. Without embracing the call to go and extend mercy. The kingdom belongs to those who will allow themselves to be inconvenienced and go and show mercy to people who we could justifiably say do not deserve it. But do they? This guy's laying beside the road, beaten, abused, cast aside. The past year has been one of many people who we have discovered over the years have been beaten and abused and cast aside. People that we knew. And some of them masked it quite well for a long time, and they've not been able to hide it anymore, and they've just begun to tell their stories. If the story of the Good Samaritan involved these people being beaten and laying by the side of the road, and if it were retold in today's context, it would include the gathering of some Levites and priests standing near them saying, yeah, I don't know really exactly what happened. It's been a long time. Why haven't they mentioned it before? Maybe something happened, but they were probably asking for it. Or the person who beat you and left you alongside the road is too important to really care for you. And we don't really ever need to get into the weeds of why that person got hurt to extend mercy to them. They're brokenhearted. Change has got to happen in the lives of these people. Mercy is a catalyst. You understand a catalyst? How'd you do in high school chemistry? A catalyst is something that is added to two other things to cause a reaction. It makes something happen. It doesn't change in itself, but it causes change. Mercy is a catalyst. When you can express mercy to people who have been abused and hurt and beaten, it doesn't take away the hurt or the abuse, but it allows something to happen in their lives, and the Lord begins to move and touch them. Mercy is a catalyst. In Ephesians 2, 4 and 5 says, but God, who is rich in mercy, because of his great love with which he has loved us, even when we are dead in trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. When someone has a story and they are hurting, let me encourage you, sit down and listen. Extend mercy to them. Be the go and do church that turns the ear to those that are beaten alongside the road. Don't ask them, how'd you get yourself into this? Don't ask them, are you sure that none of this was your fault? Just listen. Your listening and extending mercy to them doesn't get anybody off the hook for anything, but it is a catalyst for the Lord to come in and touch them. A go and do church goes and sins no more. It goes and it extends mercy. We want to ask for faith to do those things. We also want to ask faith to go and give. You ever seen these Viking shows where they're ready to go to war and they're all milling around, and then all of a sudden the enemy comes up over the hill and some random Viking yells, "Shield wall!" and all these shields come click together? You ever seen this? Sometimes when you're a pastor and you mention the word giving, you can almost hear somebody yell, "Shield wall!" Put the shields down. Let me explain my motivation here, okay? I'm not fundraising. All right? I'm not saying we never will. I'm just saying that's not what we're doing right now. I'm not talking about you having faith to support a project or a person. I'm asking do you have faith in your provider enough that you would give. Now, we often hear, people say, well, technically, by the way, when people start a sentence with technically, they're really looking for a hole every time. Even if they're right, they're looking for a way around it. Technically, Jesus never taught tithing. That's Old Testament. And I understand their argument. I believe in tithing. I practice tithing, but I see where they're coming from. Jesus never said, go tithe. Jesus also never said, go breathe. But none of these people have asphyxiated themselves. So that argument from silence is not very strong. Jesus never directed us to tithe. However, he talked about tithing in a way that gives us an indication that he thought it was normal. Matthew 23:23 says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay the tithe of mint and anise and cumin and have neglected the weightier matters of justice, of law, justice, mercy, and faith. These you ought to have done, without leaving the others undone. So he recognizes, hey guys, you're tithing. Big whoopee, good for you. You can't use that as an excuse not to do this, but he never actually tells them not to do. He celebrated their tithing. He just wanted them to pair it with justice and mercy. Because Jesus knew for those that had the money to give, writing a check might be the easiest thing in the world. He's like, yeah, it's actually not even costing you that much. In fact, when you look at how Jesus challenges people about giving, if you really got gripped and convicted about Jesus' teaching about giving, you'd beg to go back to tithing. Earlier in Matthew, he's speaking to a young government official who is weighing the cost of following him. This guy's wrestling. Do I want to put faith in Jesus? It's going to be expensive. And Jesus, who also wasn't fundraising, was addressing this man's heart. Jesus told him of the standard of the kingdom of God, which isn't merely tithing. The God of the Old Testament asks for 10%. In the New Covenant, we're expected to surrender everything. And he tells him in Matthew 19:21, if you want to be perfect, he's not being sarcastic here. He's saying, if you want a goal, if you want to walk with me, sell what you have, give it to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. And come, follow me. Randy, are you advocating giving 100%? Actually, I'm advocating that you look at everything you have and realize it's all God's. That's what I'm advocating. Well, wait a minute though. Does God want us to live indoors? Yeah, I believe he does. But you recognize that when you pay that rent bill, that was God's money. Does God want us to pay our bills? Yeah, he does. He wants you to be a responsible citizen, and he wants you to meet your commitments. He just wants you to realize that when you do, it's his money. Does God want us to extend the kingdom by giving generously? Of course he does. And that's easier to do once you've understood that you paid the rent and paid all the bills with his money to begin with. And it's a faith walk to do it. Just like some have to stir up their faith to walk away from sin, and some have to stir up their faith to walk in mercy, some of us have to really stir up our faith to give. And God is gracious to us as we do it. And he tells us that even in our giving money back to him, his money, by the way, he will in turn take care of us. Malachi 3:10 says, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing, there will not be room enough to store it. If it's all his money, does it matter if it's in your pocket or his? Where did you think you got that to begin with? He gave you strength to work. He gave you health. He gave you the ability to go out and earn his money so that you could pay your bills and you could give back to him. Giving generously breaks off a miserly mindset over our heart. And when you can learn to do it, when you can stir up your faith to do it, it changes how you feel about it. I have watched the smile that generosity puts on people's faces, and it's almost as delightful to the giver as it is to the receiver. It really is. Have you ever given something and gotten as much joy out of giving it as the person who received it? That's what he does. 18 years ago, we brought Zoe home from the hospital in Las Vegas. Got home, we had 3 older boys and a new baby, and we had a kind of a small SUV. It had a real tiny, like the back seat was like not for human beings. It had 3 seats, but the back seat was really small. And because the boys were so big, the baby had to go way in the back seat. And getting the car seat back there was like gymnastics. You know, you had to like strap her in, and at one point she's upside down, and click, there you go, honey. And it was just terrible. And so we did this for about a month, and out of the blue, a man calls me from Georgia who I had met one or two times. And he said, hey, I see your family's growing. I said, yeah, we brought home a little girl. We've adopted a little girl. Like, oh, that's great. And he said, is your car big enough for 4 kids? And I said, ish, like kind of, you know. I said, it's got 3 seats, but yeah, no. And he said, I'll tell you what. If you can come like tomorrow, if you can drive to Atlanta, I'm getting ready to get a different Suburban. I was going to trade off my old one. I will give you my old Suburban, and I'll take your car, and I'll trade that off, and you'll have a Suburban. I think, well, that's great. That's a good thing, you know. So I get off the phone. A few hours later, he calls me, and he goes, do you have 2 cars? I said, no. He goes, I'll tell you what. Fly to Atlanta. I'll buy you a ticket, and when you get to Atlanta, you can take my old Suburban and drive it. I'm like, oh, this keeps getting better and better, you know. So I go to bed in the morning. I wake up. I'm heading to the airport, and he calls me again. And I remember thinking, deal's off. You know, it's just too good to be true, right? He calls me, and he goes, I'm not going to give you my old Suburban. He goes, my old Suburban has a lot of miles on it. When you land, I found another one with low miles. I'm going to go buy you this Suburban and send you home. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to shut the phone off because that's as good as it's going to get. Like, there's no way this idea is going to get any better. So I get there, and sure enough, we leave the airport, and he goes, and he's found a really nice used Suburban for me, and he just flat out writes the check and buys me this Suburban. And we go and I spend the night at his house, drive home the next day, and that night over dinner, I just ask him, I'm like, how did we get from Bowlanders might need a car to just buying a Suburban? I'm particularly interested on the progression of the deal that gets better and better as it goes on. And he goes, I just wanted to bless you guys. And then my 8-year-old comes in, and I told them, hey, there's these folks that, you know, have had a baby, and we're going to give them our old Suburban. And he goes, my 8-year-old said, you're going to give him the old one? I said, yeah, why? He goes, Dad, that wasn't good enough for us. Why is it good enough for them? And he said, I got convicted. And he said, I just wanted to give you something as good as I was going to have. And I'm telling you, in that moment, he was as joyful as I was. Because there is a joy that comes when you feel to give in a specific way and you're obedient. Like, I'm saying thank you. He's like, you don't have to thank me. I'm so happy to be obedient and to go and give. A go and do church has faith to go and sin no more, has faith to walk in freedom, has faith to go and show mercy to people that are hurting, has faith to go and give, and it has faith to go and tell. Vital to the life of the believer is a desire and a willingness to share your story about what God has done for you. And Jesus was constantly telling people, go and tell, go and tell, go and tell, go and tell, to encourage other believers. There's this weird story where John the Baptist is in jail for standing up for traditional marriage. It's true. He stood up against the king that had 2 wives. And he's like, that's not right. And he gets in jail. Sometime while he's in jail, before he is beheaded, he's in jail and he's discouraged. Now, some people teach this as he was not discouraged, that he is so full of faith, he is only sending his disciples to encourage them. I don't buy it. I think he was human, and I think he's discouraged. And when these disciples go to ask Jesus, are you it? Or should we wait for somebody else? Jesus is not angry with John. He wanted to encourage him with the power of other people's testimony. So Jesus tells them, the blind are now able to see, the lame can walk, people with leprosy are being healed, and the deaf can hear. The dead are raised to life, and the poor are hearing the good news. And then in Luke 7:22, he tells them, go tell John what you have heard and seen. Go and tell the stories of the kingdom to encourage John the Baptist. Now, Jesus could have done this himself. Can you imagine the conversation if John the Baptist tells his disciples, go check if Jesus is for real. And then all of a sudden, cell block 4, you have a visitor. And it's Jesus through the glass. It's like, John, I'm the real guy. No, he sends him other people to share their story because of the power that is inherent in our story. It's why he tells us to go and tell the world in Mark 5, 18 and 19. When he got in the boat, he who had been demon-possessed begged him that he might be with him. He'd set a demoniac free, and the demoniac's like, I'm with you. But Jesus wouldn't permit him and said to him, go home to your friends. Tell them what great things the Lord has done for you and how he has had compassion to you. Why did he send the demoniac back to his friends? Because he had equity with those friends. And the guy who had been demon-possessed for years to suddenly walk in freedom and tell the story was going to change their lives. Every one of you has influence with people somewhere. People you work with, family members, people you live near. Go and tell your story. We have got to get over our weird fear of having spiritual conversations with people we perceive as non-spiritual. First of all, they're not non-spiritual. They just don't know they're a spiritual being. You are speaking to the very essence. And it is far less weird to them than you think it is. It's only weird for you. Congratulations. But when you begin to break that barrier and speak to them about things of the Spirit, of what God is speaking to you, or what he's done for you, or maybe what the Lord has for them, it changes things. Church, I'm begging you, go and tell. Years ago, I took my car into the shop and had this little old mechanic who was in his 70s, rough as a cob, like only communicated in 4-letter words. Very creative. Like he could string them together like nobody I knew. Good guy. Didn't know the Lord. And I was picking my truck up, getting fixed, and he asks me how my day's going, and I ask him how his day's going, and he stops a little bit, and he says, I'm going to shut the shop and go see my wife. I said, oh, well, that seems like a good thing. He said, she's in the hospital, and tears welled up in his eyes, and he says, she's got cancer. Now, at that point, I could do the nominal thing and just say, oh, I'm so sorry. But something rose up within me, and I said, can I pray for her right now with you? Of all of the times that I've ever asked somebody in that situation, can I pray for you? You know, I've actually never had anybody say no. Never. Like, I'm searching my brain. People are more open to conversations or receiving prayer than you possibly imagine. They're spirit beings. They just don't have language for it. What if there was a massive part of your reality that you didn't even know how to talk about it, and somebody goes, actually, I can speak to that. They rise to that. We may never be a come and see thing. We can be a go and do today. Why would we not? Stand with me. Father, I thank you for my friends this morning, for just the peace that has rested on us as we have sung of who you are, and we've prayed for one another and been together. And right now, I ask that you would infuse us with the gift of faith to be a go and do church. That today we would walk in our calling. Father, forgive us for strapping our future to some rocket that never fires or something that's never going to happen and neglecting what we can go and do today. So I pray that you would make appointments for conversations about you over the dinner table, in restaurants today, as we gather with friends maybe who don't know you tonight. Open doors for us to demonstrate that we walk in freedom, to extend mercy to people, to give generously, to go and tell. We commit to go and do. we're thankful that others at a different time decided to go and do, so we would know who you are. Pray a blessing over each one this morning. Let the church be dispersed across the city. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you.